Tom Kalinske, CEO of Sega of America from 1990 to 1996, previously CEO of Mattel. Welcome, and thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So I usually start off with the icebreaker question that I now ask all my guests, which is, what was your first computer? But since we're discussing consoles today, I'll ask you, what was your first console system you owned, and what were your first impressions of it?
Okay, because I was at Mattel, my first was Intellivision, which we founded actually in the late 70s. I don't think we got it out till 80, but anyway, and I think the first game I played was a tank game on it, which was just little blocks moving around on the screen.
That's awesome. I'm a former tanker in the Army, so I
Oh, me
appreciate that very
too.
much. Were you really?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
was.
awesome.
I joined out of Tucson. I finished my degree at Wisconsin. I started graduate work, and in 1966, they were drafting us out of graduate school. So I returned to my hometown, which was Tucson, and I joined the Army Tank Corps there.
You'll appreciate I don't know if you can see it. I've got some, we'll see if the microphone stretches. I'll show you my other decorations here. I've got you'll recognize
Is that an M60?
Yeah, it is indeed. This is probably what you trained on there. So.
Yeah. I trained at Fort Knox. How about you?
I was actually in the last class at Fort Knox before they moved to Fort Benning. So we probably enjoyed some of the same training sites. I remember there was one that we went to, they called it, I think, Checkpoint 37, where it was this moonscape from the last 75 years of tank training that had just poisoned the ground so nothing could grow there. And we did quite a bit of maneuvers and tank gunnery there. It was a lot of fun. I couldn't believe they paid me to do it.
Tell you one funny story about that place. So I ended up being a sergeant and a tank commander. But while I was in training, there was this smart ass lieutenant, and it was very rainy and wet and out at that training range. And he was criticizing all of us for not running our tanks fast enough through the puddles. So he got in to drive an M60 to show us how it's done. And he hit one of these so-called puddles. It turned out to be a mini lake. And he just went blah, 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 down.
Oh, no.
Pretty soon we saw this guy coming up out. And it was him. He ruined an M60 by driving into a small pond.
That's awesome. I've got a similar story at that same range, probably, where I was a lieutenant, and they rotated us so we could train on the different parts of the tanks. I was driving along, and I hit a bump, and I caught some air, and I freaked out.
Oh,
and
my
I hit
God.
the brakes, but you're not supposed to do that on a 60-ton M1A1 tank. And so imagine 60 tons flying through the air, and if I had just kept those treads rolling, it would have been fine, but I didn't, because then the tracks just froze in the air. So it just came down, and I broke the torsion bar in the middle.
Oh, my God.
And so it had the limp back, and they called the wrecker out to drag us. All I heard over the CVC were all these curses, and and I saw this helmet fly.
Oh, well, all the sergeants loved you, lieutenant. You know that.
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun, and I ended up becoming a tank platoon leader. I held on to it for a couple of years.
Well, good for you.
Really good.
We were a desert warfare unit out of Tucson, as you can imagine. And so we trained a lot. Beside around Tucson, we trained in Fort Irwin in the edge of Death Valley. I don't know if you ever trained there, but that was really, really something. It was a little warm.
For my entire 8-year career in the Army, I didn't ever get away from Fort Irwin. I was in the National Guard, so it was on every month I was there. And then I thought, I'm so sick of Fort Irwin. I'm going to go to signal school and become a communications officer, and I'm going to sit behind a desk, and so I got assigned then to a field artillery unit out of Fort Irwin. And so I was their communications officer. So I never got away from that place. And I look at that place, the memory fondly of seeing it in the rearview mirror. So
well, me too. I was, I was just a sergeant, and in Irwin, the tanks got so hot, as you know, you had to wear gloves, because if you touch the metal, burn your hand. And one day, we didn't have internet or anything like that in 66. I saw a bulletin. They were looking for military intelligence people back in Meade who spoke a foreign language. And so I thought, Meade is a lot cooler than Fort Irwin. So I transferred, and I transferred to Meade, and I became a military intelligence in the 826 MI. And that was a lot easier. Not as much fun, but easier.
That's wild. So we trained on not only at Knox, but a lot of the same training sites, I'm sure, at
Yeah,
Irwin. So
yeah.
yeah. Going back to the discussion of Sega, I could talk for tanks all day. Great companies are successful because their leaders and their employees have passion for their product. And so you obviously had passion for what Sega was doing. Where would you say that passion started?
Well, probably from my parents. My dad was an engineer. He's a professor of engineering at. I was born at University of Iowa, where he was teaching at, and then he went into business, and he ran a division of a international filtration company that created water treatment plants for companies, but also for cities. And I would work with him in the summertime to see how he was solving problems, horrible problems of water pollution in different areas of the world, basically. And I really appreciated that he was trying to solve big problems. And my mom was an artist, and she was very passionate about her work, so it was an unusual combination. And of course, as you know, when we did in television, and Atari collapsed, and then Intellivision collapsed. It damn near put Mattel out of business. And I had mainly been on the regular toy side of Mattel, on Barbie and Hot Wheels, and created He-Man Masters of the Universe and things like that. And it bothered me that when Nintendo started back up, the guys who were left at Intellivision wanted to do software on NES, and they really had a hard time getting an agreement with Nintendo. As you know, they were very tough to deal with, and they basically had a monopoly on the business. And I didn't think a monopoly on the video game business was a very good idea. And so I was attracted to Sega, who was very entrepreneurial at the time. And of course, we tried to do all kinds of things to dethrone Nintendo. And I used to call it leading from behind. And we did all kinds of new things in the video game industry. And we did eventually dethrone them in about 93.
I do want to talk a lot about Sega, but going back a bit, you were promoted to CEO of Mattel in 1985 at the age of just 41.
Yeah.
What led you to that point in your career?
Well, I had, I started at Mattel on preschool toys, and did CNCs and Jack in the Boxes, and helped build that business, changed the packaging to red and white, did wooden putt-putt toys, did unbreakable toys made out of what we call tough stuff. And we grew the business, from, 20 million to about 80 million at the time. Doesn't sound like much today, but back then it was. And Ruth Handler and Elliot Handler were the founders of Mattel, and they liked me, which was fortunate. They were like my second parents. And one day Ruth came into my office, which actually I think was a cubicle, and she said, she was a tough old lady. She was like 5 feet tall and swore like a sailor. And she said, Tom, Mattel sales declined last year, fell from 100 million to 42 million. The retailers say it's over for Barbie, that we should go on to something else. The Wall Street analysts say it's over for Barbie. My own sales force says it's over for Barbie. What do you think about that? And I said, Ruth, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Barbie will be around long after you and I are gone. She said, that's what I wanted to hear. I'm going to talk to Ray, who was my boss's boss, about getting you on the Barbie business. So I went on the Barbie business, and I changed it from being $1 a year and one accessory a year and one range of costumes a year to doing lots of stuff, doing low price doll, high price dolls, collector dolls designed by famous fashion designers like Oscar de la Renta, doing occupations, which was a big deal, Dr. Barbie, teacher Barbie, veterinarian Barbie. And I did the Olympic license. I had to sign the license, I think, way back in 74, 75 for the 76 Olympics. And we did Olympic Barbie, obviously, but we did gymnast Barbie, every Olympic sport, basically, riding Barbie, what have you. And I did more than one accessory a year at different price points. Changed the packaging to all pink, which, believe it or not, it had not been until then. Some years it'd be red, sometimes years it'd be blue, some years it would be orange. And I started, before Ruth left my cubicle, I said, what makes Barbie so special to you, Ruth? And she said, Tom, with Barbie, a girl can be anything she wants to be. I used that phrase and those words on every package for the next 15 years, and in advertising, and obviously promoted the heck out of Barbie. You can be anything you want to be. And the business grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And I kept getting promoted along the way. And I worked on other businesses. I did the same kind of segmentation with Hot Wheels. Introduced, we didn't have a male action line. Well, we did. We had Big Jim, but he wasn't very big. And so we did a lot of research on what to create. And we created He-Man Masters of the Universe. And we started it off and did about 70 million, which was very good the first year. But the chairman of the company was a crotchety guy named Art Spear. And he came into my office and he said, well, it's nice you did 70 million, but you'll never be able to compete with Hasbro. They've got Star Wars and G.I. Joe, and they've got TV shows and movies. So too bad. So I went out and did a TV show with Group W Westinghouse. It was the first time Mattel put up $3 million. Westinghouse put up $3 million, and we did 65 half-hour episodes with Filmation Animation Studios. And we did something unusual. Instead of selling it, we gave it away free to every local station in the United States that we could. And so if you were in Wichita, Kansas, you could see He-Man Masters of the Universe at 4 p.m. after school. And the same in New York City or Los Angeles or Tucson. And of course, in return, we got 3 advertising spots within each show. Well, we couldn't use them on He-Man. That was against the Children's Advertising Review rules. But we could use them on Hot Wheels, or we could sell them. Well, we ended up selling most of the 3 spots per show we got in each market, each afternoon, to McDonald's or to Kellogg's or to Nike or to whoever. And of course, the price of selling the spots depended on the ratings. Well, the ratings went through the roof. So we thought we were going to break even. We ended up making a profit off the television show. And of course, it was wildly successful, and the business grew from 70 million to eventually 700 million. And at that point, I kept getting promoted again, and that's how I became CEO.
If it's all right, I'd like to ask a little bit about your mentors. Mentorship is just so important for young people and adults alike. Who were some of your mentors along the way?
Boy, I agree with that completely. Well, I started my career at J. Walter Thompson in New York in a special unit that created new products for existing clients. And so I worked on originally things like R.J. Reynolds Foods Chungking frozen egg rolls. And the guy I worked for was Bob Boyette, and another guy was Charlie Windhorst. And Charlie worked on the Miles account, and he put me on to the vitamin business, where Miles had Chalk's chewable children's vitamins, and they were little square tablets you chewed, and the business went to hell because Bristol Myers brought out Pals, which were animal-shaped, multicolored, fruit-flavored vitamins, and literally the Chalk's business fell off the map. And so Charlie said, we got to create a new brand for Miles. And we did a lot of research, a tremendous amount of research. And in those days, Flintstones won. So we go out to Elkhart, Indiana, where Miles Laboratories was, and we said, well, you guys got to do Flintstones. And they said, Woody, get out of here. It just went off primetime. It had been on Friday night's primetime TV. And it went off. It was kind of an animated version of the Jackie Gleason show. What do you call it? And anyway, so we did more. They said, do more research. And they had marketing consultants who told them it was a stupid idea. And they were all doctors, so they didn't really have a feeling for it. So we did more research. We go back out. We said, well, it's on Saturday morning now, and the kids love it. And you got to do it. And so they finally agreed. And so we did everything for them. We did the packaging. We did the commercial, which was the first, as far as I know, was the first rotoscoped commercial ever done in the United States. And we shot a boy climbing a mountain on green screen. And it wasn't a mountain. It was he shot him on green screen, and we put the mountain in afterward, and added the animation from Hanna-Barbera, Joe Barbera, and Bill Hanna, and had the boy singing "Yabba Dabba Doo, Yabba Dabba Doo, Flintstones vitamins are good to chew." Yabba Dabba Doo, Yabba Dabba Doo, Flintstones vitamins are good to chew. And we did a number of rotoscope commercials like that with boys and girls doing athletic things. And of course, the implication was Flintstones made them healthier. And the brand took off like crazy. You've never seen it, a spike like that. You talk about a hockey stick, it went straight up. And it became the number one vitamin in the United States in 1968. And I don't follow that industry, but I think it still is today, amazingly, all these years later. And of course, nothing's on TV with Flintstones, I don't think, these days. So anyway, that's why I ended up at Mattel. Mattel hired me, and I was lucky enough at Mattel to have other mentors. Uh, I mentioned Ray Wagner, who was the president of the company, really liked me. But my direct superior was a guy named Joe Whitaker, and he taught me all about play value and pricing. And he used a term of hours of play per dollar spent. Well, a Hot Wheels car cost $1, and you could spend 100 hours on it. So it was a penny an hour. How do you beat that ever with any form of entertainment? And I used to use that same phrase many years later, talking about video games. A $40 video game you can play for 100 hours. So anyway, he was a mentor. Ray Wagner was a mentor. Ruth Handler was certainly a mentor. Very tough lady. Taught me a lot about the toy business. Her husband, Elliot Handler, was a great inventor, great designer, great artist. And he taught me about appreciating creative people and how to get creative people to work with different folks, like marketing people, finance people, things like that. So they were all really, really good, important mentors to me. Later in life, when I got to Sega, I didn't have really many mentors inside of Sega of America, but Hayao Nakayama in Japan was a very tough guy, and he used to beat the hell out of me. He'd disagree with everything I wanted to do, but then say, go ahead and do it. So he was, in a sense, a good mentor. So I've been fortunate, very fortunate in my life to have wonderful mentors, and I try to be one myself.
So tell me a little bit about how you were recruited for Sega. How did that come to be?
Well, okay. So I knew when I was at Mattel, Sega was owned by Paramount Pictures. I don't know if you remember that, way back in. Paramount was owned by Gulf and Western. Well, at Paramount, Mike Eisner worked there, and so did Barry Diller. And Mike Eisner later became president of Disney. Diller became whatever he is now. He owns all of those travel agencies. So I knew them a little bit. And I knew Hayao Nakayama from Japan because that's where a lot of their ideas came from. Sega in those days was mainly an arcade business. And that Hayao and a guy named Dave Rosen founded. And so I was aware of them. And after I left Mattel, before I went to Sega, I went to Matchbox. And I bought Matchbox out of bankruptcy receivership in the UK with a Chinese guy named David Ye, who ran Universal Manufacturing. And he lured me out of Mattel because he said, let's do something more entrepreneurial than big company Mattel. Let's get Matchbox. Well, I had tried to buy Matchbox when I was at Mattel. And the receivership in London was comprised of the banks, the government, the unions, the retailers, you name it, the suppliers. And they all said, well, okay, you can buy the company, but you got to keep a manufacturing plant open here in London, in England. And that was crazy because at Mattel, we could manufacture Hot Wheels cars for 30 cents or less. And Matchbox was manufacturing basically the same product for 60 cents in London. So I knew that wasn't going to work. So I turned it down when I was at Mattel. But David said, come join me. We'll figure out how to buy the company. And Matchbox was a really good brand name. It was just all screwed up. Anyway, so I joined him, and we rebuilt the company. And at first it was in Europe. Most of its business was actually in Europe. Only about 50 million was in the United States. Anyway, we rebuilt it and made it successful and had great distribution all through Europe and eventually through the United States. And I hired a couple of the young guys. I had to fire all the old guys at Matchbox because they literally would leave the office at 11 in the morning and go to their London clubs and show up at 3 in the afternoon smashed. And they had strange hobbies like horse racing. And so they advertised in horse racing magazines for Matchbox cars. Not a lot of kids read those. They had a blimp floating around southern England that had Matchbox on it. Well, that didn't help much. Anyway, so I fired those guys and I went down in the organization and I found young guys who were really good. A young marketing guy named John Barber, a young finance guy named Alan Benny, and others, and put them in charge of the company. And they restructured it in England, restructured it in France, restructured in Germany, restructured in Italy. So I was the mentor to them. And anyway, so we ended up with great distribution throughout England and rebuilt the sales of the company, made it profitable, took it public on the New York Stock Exchange. And at that time, Nakayama knew me. He was in Japan. He called me up and said, "Hey, I want you to take over distribution of the 8-bit master system in Europe." Well, I took a look at it and I thought, gee, this isn't that much of an improvement over the in Nintendo NES, and it's got 90% of the business. So I turned him down. So I knew him. Well, after I left Matchbox and was lying on a beach, he tracked me down and said, "Hey, you're going to love our 16-bit technology. You're going to love our handheld technology with a color screen instead of a Game Boy black and white screen. Come to Tokyo with me." And I said, "I'm on vacation." And he said, "Come on." So my daughter, who was 6 I have 6 kids. And one of my daughters, who was 6 at the time, said, "Daddy, he came all the way from Japan to find you. You've got to go with him." So I went back to Japan with Nakayama. And he was right. I fell in love with 16-bit technology. I fell in love with the color handheld screen and its capabilities of handheld gameplay. And so I accepted the position to join and become CEO of Sega of America. I said to Nakayama, I said, "But I know how you guys in Japan run companies. I've seen it my whole life. You want to make every decision here in Tokyo, and that won't work for me." And he said, No. You're going to be able to make all the decisions. I promise you that. We'll put it in writing." And I said, "Okay." And I joined.
That's a great story. And when you came on board to lead Sega of America, it had already been established. There were some employees, there was some infrastructure.
Yeah.
What shape was the company in, and how did you go about building up the team?
Yeah, it was hard. Mike Katz, who I knew from Mattel, he had worked for me on 2 different areas of Mattel, and he was certainly one of the key people on Intellivision working for me. So I knew him well. And there were other people at Mattel. Paul Rio was in finance and operations. I knew him from Mattel. The R&D people I didn't know at all, but I got to know them. But they'd have weekly meetings, and I observed these weekly meetings for a couple of weeks. And basically, they went over the same stuff every week, and it didn't seem to me to be making any progress. Oh, and I knew Al Nielsen from Mattel, who was a great product marketing guy. And I trusted him. I trusted Paul. And of course, one of the problems was they needed a new character to compete with Mario. And there was character work under development in Japan. And when they showed me what was in development, not much of it was very impressive. So I was really, I thought, oh boy, this is not going to be easy. And the price of the Genesis was too high. They didn't have great distribution. They didn't have distribution in major retailers like Target or Walmart. They had it in Toys R Us, and then the independent software chains, Babbage's and Software, et cetera, and Best Buy and those places. So this was not going to be easy. And also, I felt a lot of stuff was screwed up at the company. So I went back to Japan, and I laid out a 5-point plan to Nakayama and the board in the so-called decision room. And I said, we got to lower the price. We've got to put our best chance of defeating Mario with our lead character development. At the time, that was Mr. Needlenose, who eventually became Sonic the Hedgehog. And the board really hated that idea, because if you weren't making money on hardware, which we weren't, how the hell were you going to give away software in the hardware? That was stupid. I said, we're going to develop more software in the United States with our development team there. We're going to do more sports software, more American licenses, more Disney, more Universal Studios licenses, more American television show licenses. And we're going to make fun of Nintendo. We're going to position Nintendo as the little kid system. They can have the 9 to 13-year-old market. We're going to go after the teenage through college market. And the board really hated that idea too, because in Japan, you don't make fun of a competitor. You don't mention a competitor. And there were other things we talked about, and they hated all those ideas. And but Nakayama got up to leave the decision room, and he kicked over a chair, and he turned at the door, and he said, well, when I hired you, I said you can make the decisions for the Western world, so go ahead. And so we did all of those things, obviously, eventually, and they all worked, thank God. We did mall tours where we would introduce the 16-bit Genesis, but next to it, originally we had the NES next to it, and of course we looked better than that. But after a while, we had the SNES, which we brought over from Japan, where it had already been introduced. And so we introduced the SNES for Nintendo and showed how games looked on it and how they looked on the Genesis. And we'd ask the people to come play each system and then tell us which one they preferred. And we won that 80% of the time. And we did that across the country in malls. We had a kid on each college campus who we gave a Genesis hardware to and software to, and said, we'll keep giving you this stuff as long as you go around to each male dormitory, plug it in their lounge and play, and the same in the men's fraternities. And of course, these guys loved that. That was terrific for them. In their spare time, they could play video games and show off how good they were at playing video games in the campuses. We did the same thing in front of rock and roll concerts. We'd have the Genesis set up and the Super NES set up. And again, we introduced Super NES for Nintendo, and we showed how much better we were. And of course, our advertising positioned them as the little kid system. We made fun of them, and they hated it. They used to send me a letter every other week about how we were going to sue me or sue Sega. Anyway, that's basically what the plan was and what we did. And eventually, we got to introduce Sonic, and then following in the footsteps of having done Masters of the Universe television show and Hot Wheels television show and Princess of Power television shows at Mattel, we did the Sonic television show, and we did two versions, one on network and one syndication, and all that helped obviously tremendously too.
Now, at the time, Nintendo had a stranglehold over much of the retail space. How did you overcome that and get into places like Walmart?
That was really interesting. Yeah, you're right. And they threatened not only retailers, but they threatened third-party publishers. If they publish on the Sega system, they maybe wouldn't get the number of software cartridges they wanted for their company. And they threatened Tengen and Konami, and they threatened EA. EA didn't care, though. And lots of people that they were going to ruin their business. And, of course, did the same with retailers. So going to Target was tough because Target said, why should we believe you? And I said, well, because if you don't, you're going to have one supplier. And I know you guys don't want to only have one supplier. So you should help us out. And they were reasonable. And they said, you guys never live up to your promises. And I said, well, that's the old regime. We'll live up to our promises now. And we did. And at Walmart, that was the toughest one. That was the toughest one for me because at Mattel, Walmart was, of course, our largest retailer. We had supported them through their growth stage. I knew Sam Walton very well. He loved Barbie, mainly because the salesperson we had working on it was a very attractive Southern belle named Etheline Garver, and she would flirt with Mr. Sam, and he just loved it. And anyway, but they wouldn't carry it. So I tried, Walmart, you're not supposed to go to Mr. Sam for decisions. You're supposed to work through the buying regime. And so I did. And I couldn't get anywhere because they'd say, no, we can't harm our relationship with Nintendo. And I said, all I want is 4 feet. No, can't do it. So I did a campaign in Bentonville, Arkansas, where I advertised like crazy on TV in Bentonville and in Fayetteville up the road, and radio advertising. I bought billboards on Highway 49 going into Bentonville, right outside of Walmart headquarters. And I rented a small store in a strip mall off of Highway 49 and put up a big sign, "Come play Sega Genesis for free," and put in as many TVs and Genesises as I could. Had one of our key employees, who was very talented, had worked in retail, named Deb Hart, go out to Bentonville and manage that store. And of course, she hired local people to work in it. And of course, we had lines of people outside that store. She had to set a timer on how long you could play, because otherwise the line would just be too long and people would get frustrated. So you could come in and play for, I don't remember what it was, 15, 20 minutes, and then you had to go out. And needless to say, this caught Walmart's attention. And I would call the buyer and I would say, "Hey, last week at Target, we outsold Nintendo by 20%. Thought you'd want to know." And I'd call him back the next week and say, "Hey, last week at Toys R Us, we outsold Nintendo by 30%. Thought you'd want to know." Click. Eventually, he called me back and said, "Okay, Kalinske, just stop it. Stop the local advertising here. Shut that store down. You're driving us crazy here at Walmart. The board of directors is asking, how come we're not carrying Sega Genesis? So we'll carry you. We'll give you the 4 feet." So that's how we got into Walmart.
So all that experience, so battling it out with Nintendo, leading the company and growing it to how many employees did it have at its peak?
Oh my God. Yeah, you ask such hard questions. I don't
I should know
remember,
that.
but we
ChatGPT told me 700 for
oh,
Sega of America, but
I
it's gotta
think
be
it
more
was
than that.
something, I was close to 1,000. Yeah, so that's probably about right. And we increased the product development group dramatically underneath a wonderful guy named Joe Miller, who became a good friend. He unfortunately has passed away. And Ken Balthazer's son worked there too. And people like Ed Annunziata, who did Echo the Dolphin, and oh gosh, I'm gonna get embarrassed because I'm gonna forget all these guys' names who did such great work for us. And of course, Al Nielsen was a wonderful reviewer of these games, and if he said it was a good game, we believed it. And he eventually loved Sonic the Hedgehog 1, and both he and my favorite game is Sonic 2. So, so yeah, we hired really good people and very loyal people. A few months ago, we had a Sega reunion, and you would be amazed. We filled the ballroom at the old Sofitel Hotel. It's now got a different name, and the heads of Sega of America came up from LA. Ivo Gerskovich came up, and some others came up. So it was really a nice get together. But people who worked at Sega in those years loved the company. They talk about it as their best experience ever. So yeah, great people.
So building that corporation and going through all those battles had to have been very stressful. A lot of people don't think about the human beings behind these sorts of things. How did it affect you and how did you handle it?
Yeah, it did. It did affect me. I worked endlessly hours. Uh, and it was very important to build that team and that camaraderie. So we did things like on Fridays, in Silicon Valley, it's now common, but when we were doing it, I don't think it was as common. We'd bring out barrels of beer and start up a barbecue and do hot dogs and hamburgers and things like that, and had parties. Regularly had obviously a big Christmas party that everybody loved. So we did a lot of fun thing. We played baseball. Never played against Nintendo, but played against EA. Played against Sony, who was just starting up then. In fact, we helped. That's another funny story. We helped Sony. Sony was publishing. They were doing software mainly before they did hardware, and they were publishing on our platforms. And they were one of the first to agree to publish on the famous Sega CD. And they did the 3 original titles, and we did 3 original titles, and we collaborated on that. I lent them Joe Miller to help teach them how to publish on a CD-ROM. And so we had a very good relationship with them, but we also entertained with them, if you will. So lots of fun things. You should talk to some of the former Sega people because I forget too much stuff that we did. I should introduce you to Ellen Beth Van Buskirk, EB,
I'd
who
love
was
to.
our head of communications. She was wonderful.
I'll have to do a few more interviews to discuss that time. There was such an exciting time. I was around 9 years old when I got a Sega Genesis for Christmas.
Oh
Guys
my
my age in
gosh.
their 40s and 50s, we're now reminiscing, and so many of us are wanting to share those games with children of our own, and there's a huge resurgence in the popularity of retro games that I believe will only continue to grow, especially as we start to reach retirement age and have more time. What are your thoughts on the popularity of retro games, and where do you see things heading?
Well, like many things in my life, I never expected it. And when people asked me years ago, would that ever happen? I didn't think it would because the new systems are so good and the new software is so good. And, we look kind of old if you look at the, Sega games that we did back in those days compared to what they're doing today. We don't look like real human beings. We look like animated human beings in the games we did. So I'm amazed at it. And if you'd asked me years ago, would it happen? I would have said no. And obviously, I'm wrong on that. I've been invited to talk about bringing back retro games a number of times. I'm not involved with Sega much anymore, but I've encouraged Evo in the US, and I've encouraged even some of the Japanese executives to bring back all of them, bring them all back. I mean, even the sports games that look antiquated by today's standards. I mean, you remember when we did Joe Montana football, for a while we outsold Madden football. Well, why not bring that back and maybe a different name on it, being it's Joe Montana versus other Hall of Fame quarterbacks or something. But I think it would be great to do.
So, what have you been up to since 1996, since leaving Sega?
When I left the video game industry, I was fortunate enough to at Sega, we introduced the Pico as a child's first computer, and most people don't remember that, but it was using technology from the video game industry. Only the cartridge was in the bottom of a book, and you put the book onto the Pico platform, and the picture that was in the book on a flat piece of paper showed up on the TV screen and would animate, and you could interact with it. Anyway, I thought that, and we sold about $100 million worth of Pico product, but the board in Japan thought I was wasting my time in education, that it was too difficult. That they said, "Oh, so $100 million, big deal. You can do a new Sega title and new Sonic title and do 400 million." So when I left, I went to join with Mike Milken and Larry Ellison, two fairly famous guys. They were billionaires back then. Larry when I joined, I think Larry was worth 30 billion. Now he's worth like 400 billion. And Mike is worth a couple. Well, he's still worth, I don't know what, but several billion. Anyway, they wanted to form a company to use technology to improve education. And I was all for that. And the business plan was like a piece of paper with a big circle on it. And each part of the education market was segmented out: adult education, college education, high school education, training for electricians, kids education, preschool education, you name it. We wanted to do all of that. And they each invested $250 million. So I was a startup at Knowledge Universe with $500 million in the bank. And we started investing in companies. Well, we did a computer training company called Productivity Point International. It trained largely on Microsoft platform. We did one in the UK named at the time CRT, Computer Resource and Training. And the idea there was to take a computer expert and train him on the next level of computer expertise, and then put him out on a consulting role where he would earn more money. And when that assignment was done, do the same thing over and over again. That company became known as Spring. It became the largest computer training company in UK and Europe. We did a kids education, and we invested in a guy named Mike Wood, who was a lawyer here in the Bay Area, very successful lawyer, gone to UC Berkeley for law school, Stanford for business school, and he had a son who was having trouble learning to read. So he started a company called Leapfrog. And the first product was done with chips from Lawrence Livermore Labs that taught phonics. And he worked with Stanford University, the head of Stanford University, or the second in charge of Stanford University's School of Education. And most of the products we developed, he would tell us what a 6-year-old needed to know about learning to read, what a 7-year-old needed. The same thing, somebody from there about what they need in mathematics. And we would build those into products to make the product more fun and interesting. And so the first thing we did was the phonics desk. We taught phonics to kids. We did math training on something that was called the turbocharge. And we always consulted with, we had a board of educators, not just Stanford professors, but Berkeley, Stanford, Michigan, Northwestern, all over the place, helping us design these products. So everything we did we knew was correct, at least correct, according to those professors, in teaching young children. And a lot of people didn't do that. They'd try to do an educational product, but it wasn't correct educationally. Anyway, you probably don't know this history, but Creative Playthings was supposed to be an education company. It failed. Creative Guidance was supposed to be an education company. It failed. Gerber Baby Foods started a toy division to do education out of Atlanta, Georgia. It failed. So we were the first one to really be successful. And pretty soon we did the Leap Pad, which was a takeoff of the Pico product. And it became very, very successful. In fact, in 2002, the Leap Pad outsold the lead Barbie, outsold the lead Star Wars product, and was literally called the toy of the year by the toy industry. It was the first time that had ever happened, where an educational product had outsold regular toys. So, and we grew the business from literally, we bought Mike Wood when he was doing $3 million. We grew it to $20 million, to $75 million, to $130 million, to $250 million, to $350 million, to eventually $680 million. And I was Mike's mentor, if you will. And even though he was a lawyer, he was very creative. He was very good at developing products. And we spent a lot of time discussing product and arguing over product, and wonderful guy. He too, unfortunately, has passed away. But anyway, so that in a nutshell is what got me going after the video game industry. We then ended up selling Leapfrog, went on to doing other education companies, did something called Global Education Learning, which, as it sounds, we're going to take American education and introduce it around the world. And the first market we chose was China. And it was actually working pretty well until recently, when this guy Trump was running for office, and it scared the hell out of us because we knew he had a terrible relationship with China. And even though we had built a business called Yalan in China that had 30 million moms using it once a week, 30 million. It's a small number in China, but it was a profitable business. It was doing well. We basically answered moms' education questions on any question they had. How to teach my 8-year-old math, how to teach my 10-year-old piano, how to teach my 6-year-old to read English. And we did deals with companies in China, Foreign Language Research Press, FLTRP, leading publisher in China. But we said, oh my God, we've got investors. We can't risk their money with a guy coming, maybe winning the presidency, who has a bad relationship with China. So we sold the company to a private equity firm in China. We sold it very profitably for our investors. Everybody was happy. But that was kind of the last thing I did in education. I'm still on, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm on the board of a couple education companies. I'm on the board of something called Teach the World Foundation. I'm on the board of something called Story World. I'm on the board of the Strong National Museum. I'm involved in a lot of education there. So I'm still involved in education using technology to make it better.
All right. Any closing thoughts that we didn't cover that you'd like to share?
No, I like the fact that you asked about mentorship because I feel very strongly about that, feel it's very important, and have tried to fulfill that role. Still today, I still am mentoring different CEOs or executives in different companies. So I think that's really, really important. And also I like this idea that I mentioned to you of leading from behind. At
You learned that
Sega.
probably in the Army. That's one of the first principles they taught.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Tom Kalinske, for
Okay.
joining. I really appreciate it. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.